My name is Ethan Harper, and I have always been the different one in my family of high achievers. When my wildlife photography career became the family joke, I learned to smile through their ridicule. But at that fateful dinner when my brother introduced his doctor girlfriend, I never expected their usual mockery would lead to the moment that changed everything. Before I tell you how I turned this humiliating dinner into the moment that changed my family forever, let me know where you are watching from and subscribe if you have ever had to prove your family wrong. Growing up in Maplewood, a wealthy New Jersey suburb, meant certain expectations. Our massive Tudor-style estate, with its manicured lawn and circular driveway, represented everything my parents valued: status, appearance, and traditional success. The Harper name meant something in our community. My father, David Harper, was not just any surgeon. He was the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at St. Jude Metropolitan, the man who saved lives and commanded respect wherever he went. His patients included influential figures and politicians. The hospital wing named after him stood as a physical monument to his achievements. At home, he was equally commanding his word, the unquestioned law. My mother, Margaret Harper, matched him in ambition and status as a corporate attorney at Crown and Harding LLP, one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms. She represented major corporations in litigation that made national headlines. Her designer wardrobe and perfectly maintained appearance were as much a part of her identity as her sharp legal mind. Together, they formed an intimidating power couple that our community both admired and feared. Then there was my brother Ryan, 3 years my junior, but already following perfectly in our father's medical footsteps. He was a promising surgical resident at the same hospital where Dad reigned supreme. He inherited his clinical detachment and mother's social grace. Ryan always knew exactly what to say, what to wear, and how to please our parents. I, on the other hand, was the anomaly. From childhood, I found more comfort in nature than in country clubs. While my family discussed hospital politics over dinner, I'd be mentally framing the perfect shot of a hawk outside our dining room window. My room was filled with nature books instead of medical journals. My first camera, a vintage Canon I bought with lawn mowing money, became my most prized possession. Photography is a hobby, Ethan, not a career, my father declared countless times. Harper family members are doctors and lawyers, not struggling artists. Even in high school, when my wildlife photos won regional competitions, these accomplishments were dismissed as extracurricular activities that would look good on his medical school applications. My parents indulged my passion only insofar as they believed I would eventually outgrow it. The breaking point came during my 3rd year in pre-med at Dartmouth College. I was maintaining a respectable GPA while secretly submitting photos to nature magazines. When I sold my first image to a regional wildlife publication, I felt more pride than I ever had acing a biology exam. That night I called my parents, hoping finally for approval. "That is nice, darling," my mother Margaret said distractedly. "But have you started your LSAT prep applications are due soon?" The next day I dropped out of pre-med and switched my major to environmental studies with a minor in photography. When I finally gathered the courage to tell my parents over one of our mandatory Sunday dinners, my father's David Harper face turned such a deep shade of red that I genuinely worried he might have a stroke. "You're throwing away everything we have built for you," he shouted. "Everything we have sacrificed." My mother's approach was different but equally painful. "Ethan, darling, you are just confused. Let us make an appointment with Dr. Sullivan. He is a wonderful therapist." Ryan sat silently watching me become a disappointment in my parents' eyes. His slight smile told me everything. With me out of the running, he would now be the sole recipient of their pride and approval. The years that followed were financially difficult. I moved into a tiny apartment in Harborview, Queens, so small I had to convert my bathroom into a dark room on weekends. I took whatever photography gigs I could find, weddings, events, portraits to pay rent while building my wildlife portfolio during every free moment. My parents' approach shifted from anger to pity. "How is the photography thing going?" became their standard question. The slight pause and emphasis made it clear they expected me to have given up by now. When I could not afford to join them on their annual Vail ski trip, my mother told relatives I was finding myself. Rather than admit I was scraping by on an early career photographer's income, family dinners became exercises in endurance. Each gathering featured the same routine: father highlighting Ryan's accomplishments, mother subtly questioning my life choices, and Ryan basking in his role as the child who had not disappointed everyone. "Your cousin Tyler just made junior partner at his law firm," my mother would announce. "Remember how you two used to compete at everything?" The unspoken comparison hung in the air. These gatherings grew more infrequent as I focused on my career. I had begun to gain traction with smaller nature magazines, and my social media following was growing steadily. Last year, I spent 3 months in Alberta, Canada, capturing the daily life of a wolf pack, an assignment that paid modestly but built my reputation among wildlife photographers. Not that my family noticed. When I mentioned this project during Thanksgiving dinner, my father changed the subject to Ryan's new research grant. My small victories remained invisible at home. My passion was still reduced to an immature rebellion in their eyes. Despite everything, some stubborn part of me still craved their approval. I kept showing up for family events, kept mentioning my small successes, kept hoping for some acknowledgement that I had not made a terrible mistake. But as the years passed, that hope grew thinner, replaced by a quiet determination to succeed on my own terms. The call from my mother came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was editing photos from a recent bird migration series. Her voice carried that forced cheerfulness that always put me on edge. "Ethan, darling, we are having a special family dinner this Friday. Ryan has someone important he wants us to meet." I knew immediately what this meant. Ryan had been dating someone new for a few months, and apparently this one had lasted long enough to meet the parents. In our family, bringing someone to dinner was practically an announcement of serious intentions. "I am pretty busy with a project deadline," I hedged, though the truth was I would rather spend the evening cleaning my camera lenses than enduring another Harper family inquisition. "This is important to your brother." My mother's voice took on that slight edge that meant refusal was not an option. "Everyone will be there. 600 sharp. Ethan." She paused. "Wear something appropriate." After hanging up, I stared at my calendar. The dinner fell exactly 3 days before I would hear back about the Global Explorations magazine submission. A photograph of a rare mountain lion mother and cubs I had spent weeks tracking in Colorado. If accepted, it would be my first major breakthrough. Part of me wanted to wait until I had news, maybe finally something that would impress them. But experience had taught me that hypothetical success never counted with the Harpers. Only tangible, preferably framed credentials on the wall mattered. For the next few days, I vacillated between dread and a faint, foolish hope that maybe this time would be different. Maybe Ryan's happiness would soften the usual dynamics. Maybe his girlfriend would be someone interesting who might actually care about photography or nature conservation. Friday evening arrived with depressing speed. I stood in front of my closet trying to decipher what my mother meant by appropriate. I settled on dark jeans and a blue button-down shirt that did not have any visible wrinkles. Professional enough to avoid immediate criticism, but not so formal that it looked like I was trying too hard. I even polished my one decent pair of shoes. The drive from Harborview to Maplewood always felt like a journey back in time. With each mile, I could feel myself reverting from independent adult to disappointing son. I rehearsed neutral topics of conversation and prepared standard responses to the inevitable questions about my career situation. Just get through dinner, I told myself. Smile, deflect, escape. The memory of last Thanksgiving flashed through my mind. My father's pointed questions about my non-existent retirement plan and barely adequate health insurance. My mother's suggestion that her friend's law firm was always looking for bright young people for their administrative team. Ryan's smug smile as he described his new luxury apartment. As I pulled into the familiar driveway, the imposing Tudor-style estate loomed before me, windows glowing with warm light that somehow never seemed to reach me. The contrast between this house and my cramped apartment always struck me anew. Here, space was abundant, furniture was heirloom quality, and every object had been selected for its ability to impress visitors. Sophia, the housekeeper, who had been with my family since I was a child, opened the door. Unlike my parents, her smile was genuine.
"Mr. Ethan," she said warmly, "so good to see you. You are looking too thin. They have not started yet. You can still sneak a cookie from the kitchen." It was our old routine from when I would come home from school hungry and looking for comfort. Her small kindness nearly undid me. "Thanks, Sophia," I said, hanging up my jacket. "How are things here?" "Same as always," she replied with a knowing look. "Your brother's young woman seems nice, very polite." That was Sophia code for appropriate Harper material. I nodded, already feeling the weight of expectation settling on my shoulders. Outside the dining room, I paused to gather myself. Through the doorway, I could hear the murmur of conversation. My father's authoritative tone dominating, punctuated by feminine laughter that must belong to my mother and Ryan. A deeper, unfamiliar voice occasionally joined in, the girlfriend, presumably. I straightened my shirt, ran a hand through my hair, and took a deep breath. For a brief moment, I considered turning around and leaving before anyone saw me. But some stubborn part of me, pride perhaps, or just plain stubbornness, propelled me forward. "You're Ethan. Harper," I reminded myself. "Your work matters even if they do not see it yet." With that thought steadying me, I stepped into the dining room and into the familiar performance of being the family disappointment. "There he is?" My mother's voice carried across the room, pitched slightly too high. "We were beginning to think you had gotten lost." The familiar dining room, with its dark cherry table and ancestral portraits, felt like a stage set for the evening's performance. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, and the good china only used for special occasions was arranged with precision. "Traffic," I muttered, though I had actually been sitting in the car for 10 minutes, delaying the inevitable. My father barely looked up from his conversation, acknowledging me with just the slightest nod. Ryan, however, was on his feet, pulling forward a tall, confident woman with a quick smile and a tailored suit. "Ethan, this is Lauren," he said, his voice tinged with unmistakable pride. "Lauren, my brother Ethan." Lauren Scott extended her hand with the confident grip of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Her watch, which I could not help but notice was a high-end luxury brand worth more than all my camera equipment combined, gleaming as we shook hands. "Great to finally meet you," she said with what seemed like genuine interest. Ryan told me about his photographer brother. I wondered exactly what he had told her. Probably that I was the family charity case, the cautionary tale of potential squandered. "All good things, I hope," I replied with the practiced smile I reserved for these occasions. "Of course," Ryan said quickly, though his eyes suggested otherwise. "Lauren just finished her residency in neurosurgery at Mount Si West. She is joining Daddy's department next month." Of course she was. I should have predicted this. Ryan would naturally find someone who would further cement his place in our father's world, someone who would fit seamlessly into the Harper vision of success. "Impressive," I said because it was expected. "Drinks before dinner." My mother Margaret interjected, already moving toward the bar cart. "Lauren, another gin and tonic, Ethan. We have that pale ale you like." By that pale ale I like. She meant the only craft beer brand she considered acceptable in her house. I accepted the bottle without correcting her. The seating arrangement came as no surprise. My father, David Harper, at the head of the table, my mother at the opposite end, Ryan and Lauren along one side in the positions of honor, and me across from them where my father would have to turn his head to acknowledge my existence. The first course arrived, some elaborate scallop appetizer that Sophia had undoubtedly spent hours preparing under my mother's exacting instructions. Lauren was just telling us about the revolutionary procedure she is developing. My father said, pointedly, not including me in the conversation that had obviously been in progress. Lauren launched into an explanation of some neurosurgical technique that had my father nodding with approval and my mother watching with the expression she reserved for people she deemed worthwhile. Ryan kept touching her arm possessively as she spoke, occasionally glancing at me to ensure I was witnessing his triumph. I nodded at appropriate intervals while studying the dynamics around the table through the mental viewfinder I had developed over years of observation. If this were a wildlife documentary, the hierarchies would be clear. The dominant male, my father, his chosen successor, Lauren, the female. Reinforcing social bonds, my mother, and the junior male securing his position through an advantageous mate selection, Ryan. And then there was me, the outlier, the one who did not strengthen the pack. "And what about you, Ethan?" Lauren asked, suddenly breaking my anthropological reverie. "Ryan mentioned you have been working on some projects recently." A brief, awkward silence fell. My brother shot Lauren a warning look that she missed entirely. My mother became very interested in rearranging her silverware. "Yes," I said carefully. "I have been focusing on North American predator species. I just finished a series on mountain lions in Colorado." My father made a small noise that might have been a suppressed snort. My mother jumped in with practiced smoothness. "Ethan has always had such an active imagination. Even as a little boy, he would spend hours in the woods behind the house." The subtle diminishment was so familiar, I almost did not notice it anymore the way she spoke of my career, as if it were a childhood phase I had not outgrown. Actually, I started to explain about the magazine interest in my work, but Ryan interrupted. "Lauren just purchased the most beautiful property in the Upper East Side," he announced. "Tell them about the pre-war detailing honey." And just like that, the conversation swerved away from me again. As Lauren described crown moldings and original hardwood floors, I caught my parents exchanging a satisfied glance. This was what success looked like to them, real estate possession status. The main course arrived, giving me a brief reprieve from the performance. The food was excellent. Prime rib cooked perfectly. Roasted vegetables arranged with artistic precision. Potatoes whipped to cloud-like consistency. I focused on eating while the conversation continued to flow around me. "We are thinking of having the hospital fundraiser at the club this year," my father was saying. "Lauren, you will want to join. Of course, I will put your name up for membership." More territory marking more club membership the Harper way. Throughout the meal, I noticed something unsettling. Whenever I would speak offering a brief comment or answering a direct question, my family members would exchange quick glances. Sometimes raised eyebrows, sometimes subtle eye rolls, sometimes just that knowing look that excluded me from some shared understanding. The pattern became increasingly obvious. I'd speak, they'd look at each other. A silent communication would pass between them, and then someone would redirect the conversation. Lauren seemed to notice too. I caught her watching this dynamic with slight confusion, though she was trying hard to fit in with her potential future family. As dessert was being served, my mother's famous crème brûlée, which she pretended to have made herself, though Sophia had undoubtedly done all the work. Lauren turned to me again. Perhaps she felt sorry for me, or maybe she was just being polite. Either way, it set the stage for what came next. "So, Ethan," she said in a friendly tone, "Ryan mentioned you do photography, but I do not think I really understand what exactly you do for work day to day. What does a wildlife photographer's life look like?" The table went quiet, too quiet. I opened my mouth to answer, to explain my process, my goals, the magazines I contributed to. But before I could form the first word, my mother's voice cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "Do not embarrass us," Margaret said sharply, her smile brittle and fixed. "Not tonight." The table erupted in laughter.
Not light, good-natured chuckles, but the kind of laughter that builds walls and establishes sides. My father's deep rumble, my mother's practiced society titter, and Ryan's sharp, vindictive peal. Lauren looked momentarily confused, but joined in with an uncertain laugh, obviously not wanting to be left out of the family bonding. "Maybe lie this time," Ryan added, smirking across the table at me. "So you do not sound so pathetic." The words hit like physical blows. My throat tightened, and a familiar burning sensation spread across my chest, 20 years of diminishment, concentrated into 2 sentences. "I do not understand," Lauren said, glancing between Ryan and me. My father leaned forward, placing his hand on Ryan's shoulder with conspiratorial male bonding. "Ethan likes to believe he is a professional photographer," he explained, his voice dripping with condescension. "Chasing animals through remote regions, and such a hobby he never outgrew. Unlike a real career," my mother added pointedly, "like medicine or law." I sat frozen, the untouched dessert forgotten before me. This was hardly the first time they had belittled my career, but something about doing it so brazenly in front of a stranger, making me the family joke for a newcomer's entertainment, cut deeper than usual. The dinner table suddenly felt miles long, the distance between me and them uncrossable. I was transported back to childhood dinners where my report card was never quite good enough to teenage years. When my father questioned why I could not be more like Cousin Tyler in college, when my mother introduced me as our son, who is still figuring things out even when I was a Dean's List student, he had such potential. My mother was telling Lauren now as if I were not sitting right there. Dartmouth pre-med, could have joined his father at St. Jude Metropolitan, but he decided photography was more fulfilling. She pronounced the word as, one might say, delusional. Ryan was practically glowing with malicious pleasure. "Remember when he lived in his SUV for 3 months to photograph some crane migration?" He added, "Dad had to bail him out when his vehicle got ticketed." This was a deliberate mischaracterization. I had slept in my SUV during a conservation project, a common practice among wildlife photographers, and the vehicle had been ticketed, not impounded. I had paid the fine myself, but the false narrative made for a better cautionary tale. "The Harper legacy," my father intoned, lifting his wine glass in a mock toast. "3 generations of medical and legal excellence and 1 artist." The pause before artist contained multitudes of disapproval. I felt my face burning, but maintained a neutral expression through years of practice. Something was building a pressure behind my ribs that had been accumulating for decades. Lauren, to her credit, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "I actually think wildlife photography sounds fascinating," she offered, an obvious attempt to ease the tension. "Oh, it is a wonderful hobby," my mother said dismissively. "Just not a career for someone from a family like ours." "A family like ours," my father repeated solemnly. "Builds legacies, contributes meaningfully to society, achieves excellence in fields that matter." The unspoken conclusion hung in the air. "Unlike what you do." Ryan, perhaps sensing Lauren's discomfort, placed his hand on her arm. "Ethan is just different," he explained, as if diagnosing a harmless but unfortunate condition. "We have learned to accept it." The condescending tone, the patronizing head tilted, was all so familiar, this performance of tolerant superiority. They had cast me as the family eccentric, the wayward son who needed their patient understanding rather than an adult who had chosen a different but equally valid path. I thought of the countless dawn mornings I had spent lying motionless in muddy hides waiting for the perfect shot, the freezing nights in remote mountains tracking elusive predators. The technical skill I had developed, the knowledge of animal behavior, I had accumulated the networks I had built with magazines and conservation organizations, none of it visible or valuable to the people who should have been my strongest supporters. As the mockery continued, my mind drifted to the email I had received that morning, the one I had not mentioned yet, the one from Global Explorations magazine's photography editor. I had been checking my phone obsessively, waiting for their response, and it had finally arrived days earlier than expected. I looked around the table at my family still entertaining themselves at my expense. My mother's perfectly arranged hair and surgical precision with emotional cuts. My father's authoritative posture so accustomed to deference that my independence felt like personal betrayal. Ryan, who had chosen compliance over authenticity, reinforcing the family mythology to secure his position. And for the first time, I felt something beyond hurt and disappointment. I felt pity. Pity for people so trapped in their narrow definition of success that they could not recognize it in any other form. In that moment, watching them laugh, I made a decision. I would no longer seek their approval or validation. I would no longer measure my worth through their distorted lens. I smiled. It was not the appeasing smile I usually wore at these dinners, the one that signaled I would absorb their jabs without protest. This was different. This was the smile of someone who suddenly sees with perfect clarity. My change in demeanor must have been noticeable because the laughter gradually died down. My mother looked at me with slight confusion. My father's brow furrowed. "Oh, something funny, Ethan?" Ryan asked, annoyed that I was not playing my assigned role of shame-faced disappointment. "Actually," I said calmly, reaching for my phone, "I do have something I would like to share." My phone felt heavy in my hand as I pulled up the email I had received that morning, the one I had read at least 20 times since it arrived. The one that had made me pull my car over because my hands were shaking too hard to drive safely. "I was not going to mention this," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Since it was not a medical breakthrough or a legal victory, but since we were discussing my career choices, something in my tone silenced the table. Perhaps it was the unusual confidence so different from my typical defensive posture at these gatherings. "This morning I received an email from James Reynolds," I said, watching for any reaction to the name. Nothing. Of course, they would not know who the senior photography editor at Global Explorations magazine was. He informed me that my photograph of a mountain lion mother and cubs had been selected for next month's cover. I turned my phone around, showing them the mock-up of the magazine cover featuring my photograph, a powerful female mountain lion standing protectively over her 3 cubs at Sunrise Mountains, silhouetted in the background. The golden light catching the mother's eyes made her appear almost mythical while creating a halo effect around the family unit. My name printed clearly at the bottom. Photography by Ethan Harper. The silence that followed was unlike any I had experienced in this house. My mother's face went slack, the social mask dropping to reveal genuine surprise. My father froze with his wine glass halfway to his lips. Ryan's mouth opened slightly, no clever retort forthcoming. Lauren was the first to respond. "That is Global Explorations," she said, leaning forward to look more closely at my phone. "That is incredible. Congratulations." Her genuine enthusiasm highlighted the stunned silence from my family. I could almost see their mental recalibration happening in real time. "Well," my mother finally managed her voice higher than usual. "Is that nice a hobby that occasionally pays off?" Still trying to minimize it, still unable to acknowledge what this actually meant. It is not just the cover. I continued scrolling to the next part of the email. They had offered me a contract for a 6-month assignment documenting endangered predator species across 3 continents. The advance alone is more than a first-year surgical resident makes. I looked directly at Ryan as I said this. My father cleared his throat. "Reynolds? Did you say any relation to Senator Reynolds?" Of course, that would be his first question, searching for a connection that would explain this anomaly, some nepotistic reason my work had been selected rather than accepting its merit. "No relation that I am aware of," I replied. "James Reynolds has been with Global Explorations for 20 years. He is one of the most respected editors in wildlife photography." Ryan had recovered enough to attempt damage control. "That is wonderful, Ethan," he said with a brittle smile. "A nice validation of your passion project."
But I was not finished. I scrolled to the final paragraph of the email. They were also featuring an 8-page spread of my Wolfpack documentation from Alberta last year. The series will be considered for the Smithsonian Award for Conservation Photography, which tours worldwide. Lauren let out a low whistle. I have seen those exhibitions. The competition is incredibly selective. I nodded, allowing myself to acknowledge the achievement. The acceptance rate is lower than getting into Dartmouth's MBA program. My father flinched slightly at the comparison. Direct hits to his value system were rare for me. "May I?" Lauren asked, gesturing to my phone. I handed it over, watching as she scrolled through the email with genuine interest. "This is seriously impressive. The technical skill alone to capture these images and to get this close to predators in the wild. It is not without risk," I acknowledged, "or without significant technical knowledge and physical demands." My mother's expression had shifted from shock to something more calculated. I could almost see her mentally rephrasing the story she would tell her friends. No longer the tragic tale of her wayward son, but perhaps now the exciting narrative of her creative, adventurous boy making a name for himself. "Well," she said, smoothing her napkin, "we always knew you had a good eye. Remember those little drawings you used to do?" The attempt to infantilize my achievement, to connect it to childhood doodles rather than years of professional development, was so transparent I almost laughed. "This is not about having a good eye, Mother," I said firmly. "This is about building a career through persistence and skill despite having absolutely no support from my family." The bluntness of this statement caused another round of uncomfortable silence. We did not speak this way in the Harper household. We spoke in implications and subtle digs, not direct confrontations. Now, Ethan, my father, started his authoritative doctor voice emerging. "That is hardly fair. We have supported you in many ways." "Have you?" I asked, surprising even myself with the challenge. "Can any of you name a single photography exhibition of mine you have attended, a single publication where my work has appeared before tonight? Can you even describe what my specialty is within wildlife photography?" The silence was answer enough. Lauren, still examining my phone, looked up with growing admiration. "These wolf images are extraordinary. The composition, the lighting, and getting this close to a wild pack. How did you even do that?" For the first time that evening, I found myself explaining my work to someone who was genuinely interested. I described the months of research, the gradual process of habituating the wolves to my presence from increasing distances, the technical challenges of shooting in variable mountain light. As I spoke, I became aware of a subtle shift in the room's energy. My parents were listening, actually listening, with expressions I rarely saw directed at me. Not pride exactly, but something adjacent to it. Ryan watched Lauren's evident admiration with poorly concealed annoyance. "The contract," my father said when I finished explaining, his business mind engaging. "What exactly are the terms?" I outlined the financial arrangement, the international travel schedule. The publishing details with each point I gave made it clear to see his mental calculator running, eventually arriving at the unavoidable conclusion that my hobby had transformed into something legitimately profitable and prestigious. "So you will be published in Global Explorations," my mother said slowly, testing how this new information fit into her social framework. That is quite visible translation. Her friends might actually see it. It might reflect positively on the family. "Yes," I agreed. "And the magazine has millions of print subscribers. Plus their digital platform reaches over 50 million people monthly." This number, the audience scale, finally seemed to penetrate. My father sat back in his chair, reassessing me with new eyes. Ryan, perhaps sensing his position as the successful child slipping, attempted to regain control. "Lauren's research has been published in several top medical journals," he interjected. "That is wonderful," I said, sincerely turning to Lauren. "What is your research focus?"
Lauren, who seemed to be the only person at the table without an agenda, launched into an explanation of her work on trauma-induced neurological conditions. Unlike my family's typical medical discussions designed to exclude and establish superiority, Lauren spoke passionately but accessibly about her research. "That sounds fascinating," I said when she finished. "Actually, during my time with the wolf pack, I documented some interesting neurological effects in an older wolf that had survived a major injury. I wonder if there might be some parallels to your research." Lauren leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. "I would love to see that documentation. There is growing interest in comparative neurology across species." For the first time in my adult life, I was having a real intellectual exchange at the Harper dinner table. More surprisingly, it was with Ryan's girlfriend, the person who should have been most invested in maintaining the family hierarchy. My father cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should move to the living room for coffee." It was his standard signal that dinner was concluding, but as we stood, the usual dynamics had been disrupted. Lauren moved to walk beside me rather than following my father as new guests typically did. Ryan quickly inserted himself between us, taking her arm possessively. As we moved toward the living room, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I had finally impressed my family, though their shocked faces had admittedly been satisfying, but because I suddenly realized how little their approval actually mattered to me anymore. The living room maintained the same formal elegance as the rest of the house. Antique furniture arranged for appearance rather than comfort, family photos displaying achievements rather than moments of joy. My mother busied herself directing Sophia about coffee service, while my father selected a brandy from the drinks cabinet. I took a seat in the armchair furthest from the center, my usual position at the periphery of family gatherings. But something had changed. The energy in the room had shifted, with uncertain glances replacing the usual confident dismissal. So my father said, handing snifters of brandy to Lauren and himself, pointedly not offering me one. "This photography opportunity, it is a one-time thing, I assume." And there it was, the attempt to reclassify my achievement as a fluke rather than the culmination of years of dedicated work. Some things never changed. "Actually," I said, accepting a coffee from Sophia with a grateful smile, "it is the result of a portfolio I have been building for nearly a decade. Global Explorations does not offer contracts to photographers without established credentials." "What Ethan means," my mother interjected smoothly, "is that he has been very persistent with his hobby." Something inside me finally snapped, not in a dramatic table-flipping way, but in the quiet severing of a cord I had been clinging to for too long, the hope that they would someday genuinely see me. "It is not a hobby, Mother," I said quietly but firmly. "It is my profession, a profession I have pursued despite years of active discouragement from every person in this family." The directness of my statement created a palpable tension. We did not speak this way in the Harper house. We spoke in implications and cutting asides, not open confrontations. "No one discouraged you," my father said dismissively. "We simply wanted what was best for you." "And what was best for me, and what was best for me?" I repeated, feeling decades of suppressed frustration rising to the surface. "Or what would reflect best on you?" "Now, Ethan," my mother began in her placating tone. "No," I interrupted, surprising everyone, including myself. "I have listened to you diminish my choices for years. Tonight you will listen to me." I turned to my father first. "When I was young and won the state youth photography competition, you did not even attend the ceremony. You said, and I quote, 'Taking pretty pictures is not an achievement worth celebrating.' Do you have any idea what that felt like?" My father's face flushed, but whether from anger or embarrassment I could not tell. Before he could respond, I continued. "When I got my first magazine publication, Mother told her friends I was between jobs as if I were unemployed rather than working 80 hours per week building my portfolio." I shifted my gaze to Ryan and Lauren.
When I spent months tracking that wolf pack, living in difficult conditions, developing new technical approaches, gathering data that is being used in conservation efforts, you told everyone I was camping to avoid real responsibilities.
Ryan had the grace to look slightly abashed, though he quickly recovered. Well, it did seem rather convenient that you disappeared when Dad needed help moving offices. I was working, I emphasized. Just because my office is sometimes a mountain range does not make it any less legitimate than a hospital or courtroom. Lauren, who had been watching this exchange with growing discomfort, attempted mediation. It sounds like there have been some misunderstandings about the nature of wildlife photography as a profession. There has been no misunderstanding, I countered. They understand perfectly well. They just decided long ago that any path that deviated from their narrow definition of success was not worthy of respect. My mother's face tightened. "We have only ever wanted you to have security and stability," she said defensively, "to achieve your potential." "My potential," I repeated. "Do you even know what my potential is, Mother? Have you ever asked what I want to achieve with my work? What drives me? What challenges I have overcome? Or have you been too busy waiting for me to fail so you could say, 'I told you so'?" The question hung in the air. For perhaps the first time, my mother seemed genuinely at a loss for words. My father, uncomfortable with this direct emotional confrontation, attempted to redirect to safer territory. "This global explorations business, what is the long-term prospect? Surely it is not sustainable as you get older." "Actually," I said, "many of the most respected wildlife photographers continue working well into their 60s and 70s. Thomas Null is still doing field work in remote locations, but more importantly, experienced photographers develop multiple revenue streams, image licensing books, speaking engagements, and workshop teaching." I could see my father processing this information, reluctantly adjusting his narrative. "The advance for this project alone," I continued, "is more than I made all of last year, and the exposure from a global explorations cover typically increases a photographer's market value significantly." "Well," my mother said, clearly trying to reframe the situation in a way that worked for her, "we are certainly happy for this recognition, though I do wish you had mentioned it earlier in the evening." The implication being that I had deliberately withheld the information to make them look bad. Typical deflection. "Would it have made a difference?" I asked. "Would you have skipped the part where you told me not to embarrass you? Where Ryan suggested I lie about my career to sound less pathetic?" Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "It was just a joke, Ethan. You are being overly sensitive." "No," I said firmly. "I am finally setting boundaries after years of tolerating disrespect. There is a difference." I stood up, suddenly certain of what I needed to do. "I have spent my entire adult life trying to earn your approval, while you have spent that same time finding new ways to withhold it. That ends tonight." My father's expression darkened. "Now see here." "No." I interrupted something I had rarely dared to do. "You see, I do not need your approval anymore. I do not need you to understand or value my work. I have found success on my own terms, and I have found people who appreciate both me and my photography for what they actually are, not what they should be." My mother's hand fluttered to her throat, her standard gesture when losing control of a situation. "Ethan, darling, you are being dramatic. No one has ever said, 'We do not support you.' You have said it in 1,000 ways," I replied. "Every dismissive comment about my little pictures, every time you introduced me as still figuring things out when I was actively building a career, every family dinner where my work was not deemed worth discussing while Ryan's rotation schedule was treated like breaking news." I turned to Lauren, who was watching with wide eyes. "I apologize that you had to witness this. It was not my intention to create this situation, but perhaps it is better that you see the family dynamic clearly before you become part of it." Lauren nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty," she said carefully. Ryan shot her a look of betrayal. You are taking his side. I am not taking sides, Lauren replied, but I can see why Ethan feels undervalued. This unexpected support from the newest member of the inner circle created a palpable shift in the room's atmosphere. My father looked stunned. My mother seemed to be calculating how to regain control of the narrative. Ryan was furiously trying to communicate something to Lauren with his eyes alone. I picked up my jacket from where I had draped it over the chair. I'm going to head out now. I have an early flight to Alaska tomorrow to photograph bald eagles for a conservation project. You are leaving? My mother asked, genuinely surprised. Family dinners typically ended when my parents decided not before. Yes, I said simply. I have said what I needed to say, and I have work to prepare for. Ethan, my father began, his tone softening slightly. There is no need to rush off. We can discuss this further. I recognized the approach, the first conciliatory gesture when someone stepped out of the usual family script. It was not genuine change, just a tactical retreat to reestablish control. There is nothing more to discuss tonight, I said. I am not angry, but I am finished pretending that the way you have treated me and my career is acceptable. If you want to have a relationship with me going forward, it will have to be based on mutual respect. I moved toward the door, then paused, turning back. And if you are ever actually interested in understanding what I do, you are welcome to attend my exhibition opening at the Riverside Collective next month. I will send the details. With that, I walked out, leaving behind a silence more profound than any I had ever created in that house. As I closed the front door behind me and stepped into the cool evening air, I felt a weight lifting, the weight of expectations. I would never be able to meet judgments I never deserved and approval I no longer needed. Driving away from my childhood home, I felt neither triumph nor bitterness, only a quiet, growing certainty that I was finally free to be exactly who I was meant to be. The days following that dinner were strangely quiet. No angry phone calls from my father, no passive-aggressive messages from my mother, no snide texts from Ryan. The silence was unprecedented, and in its own way more unsettling than their usual tactics. I focused on preparations for my Alaska assignment, organizing equipment, and researching bald eagle migration patterns. When thoughts of the confrontation intruded, I reminded myself that I had spoken my truth after years of silence. Whatever came next, I had that knowledge to sustain me. A few days later, as I was packing my final items for Alaska, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Global Explorations had finalized the cover layout. Seeing my photograph officially positioned on their iconic border, my name credited beneath it, brought a surge of emotion so powerful I had to sit down. This moment, this validation of my path, belonged entirely to me. It was not inherited or expected. It was not chosen for me or achieved to please anyone else. It was mine alone, earned through perseverance, skill, and an unwavering commitment to my vision. The Alaska assignment proved challenging but rewarding. Tracking eagles along the vast river systems in winter conditions required every bit of my technical skill and physical endurance. But the resulting image, powerful, majestic birds against snow-covered landscapes, were among my best work. When I returned to my Harper apartment a few weeks later, I found an unexpected package waiting. Inside was a framed copy of my Global Explorations cover with a note. Congratulations on your achievement. This deserves to be displayed properly. Lauren. No message from Ryan, just this thoughtful gesture from his girlfriend. I was hanging the frame when my phone rang from an unknown number. Ethan, it is your mother. Her voice sounded different, hesitant, almost vulnerable. I braced myself for the usual tactics, minimization guilt, subtle manipulation. I saw your magazine.
she said after an awkward pause. At Penelope Sterling's house of all places she subscribes. Apparently she was quite impressed
When I mentioned you were my son, I waited, sensing there was more. I realized I have never actually seen your work before, not properly.
It is quite striking. The way you captured that mountain lion looking directly at the viewer there is something almost human in her eyes. This was new territory. My mother actually commenting on the substance of my work rather than its conformity to her expectations.
She is protecting her cubs, I explained. I spent 11 days tracking that family unit. The mother knew I was there but determined I was not a threat. 11 days, my mother repeated, sounding genuinely surprised. In the wild, where did you sleep? In a tent some nights, other times in my vehicle when the weather was too severe.
A long pause followed. I never really understood what your work entailed, she finally admitted. I assumed that you were just wandering around taking snapshots. I suggested I ask. She trailed off.
Something like that, she acknowledged, and I heard what might have been a hint of remorse in her voice. Your father and we have been talking about what you said at dinner. I remained silent, unwilling to make this easier for her. We may have been short-sighted regarding your career choices, she continued with evident difficulty. Your father found some of your other publications online. He was particularly interested in the conservation aspect of your work with the wolf pack. This was as close to an apology as Vivian Harper had likely ever offered anyone. I recognized the enormous effort it must have required from her. Thank you for saying that. I responded, neither accepting nor rejecting the olive branch. It means something to hear you acknowledge my work. Your exhibition, she said tentatively. The one you mentioned, is that invitation still open? It is, I confirmed. It is next month at the Riverside Collective in Midtown. We will be there, she said with the decisive tone I recognized from childhood, the one that meant the matter was settled. Your father has already put it in his calendar. After we hung up, I sat looking at the framed magazine cover. One conversation would not erase decades of dismissal, but it was a small crack in the foundation of a relationship built on conditional approval. The following months brought changes I could not have anticipated. The Global Explorations cover opened doors that had previously been firmly closed. My inbox filled with assignment offers, speaking engagement requests, and licensing inquiries. The 6-month Predator documentation project expanded to include educational components and a potential book deal. My exhibition at the Riverside Collective exceeded all expectations. The space was packed for the opening night, and to my genuine surprise, my entire family attended. My father, uncomfortable in the artistic environment, was making a visible effort to engage. My mother, who had clearly researched enough photography terminology to make appropriate small talk with other attendees. Even Ryan came, though he spent most of the evening ensuring Lauren stayed close to his side. This is extraordinary work, Ethan, Lauren said, examining a large format print of 2 wolves silhouetted against a mountain sunrise. The composition, the lighting, it tells a complete story in a single frame. That is the goal, I acknowledged, to capture not just the animal, but its context, its relationship with the environment. My father cleared his throat. The gallery owner mentioned you're documenting habitat destruction in the Pacific Northwest next month. The fact that he had sought out this information independently, that he had initiated a conversation about my work, felt like a seismic shift. Yes, I confirmed. It is part of a larger conservation project focused on salmon spawning grounds and the predator species that depend on them. He nodded thoughtfully. There are some interesting public health implications to that ecosystem collapse. My colleague at the NIH published a paper on related disease vector changes last year. It was not effusive praise or a complete understanding of my work, but it was an attempt to find common ground to build a bridge between his world and mine. For David Harper, this represented enormous growth. As the months passed, our relationship slowly transformed. The change was not dramatic or complete. My parents still occasionally made comments that revealed their fundamental worldview remained intact, but there was effort now, a conscious attempt to see me as I was rather than as they had wanted me to be. Ryan took longer to adjust. His identity had been so thoroughly built around being the successful child that my rising professional standing threatened his self-perception. Our interactions remained strained, though the open hostility had faded. Lauren surprisingly became something of an ally. Her genuine interest in my work created an unexpected connection, and we occasionally met for coffee when I was in town. Through her, I gained insight into my brother. I had never had before: his insecurities, his desperate need for validation, his genuine intelligence, often overshadowed by our parents' expectations. The greatest change, however, was within myself. The success that followed the Global Explorations cover was gratifying, but it was not what healed me. What healed me was the realization that I no longer needed my family's approval to feel whole. I had found my own measure of worth in the quality of my work, in the conservation impact of my images, and in the authenticity of my chosen path. 1 year after that fateful dinner, I found myself in the Serengeti Plains, Kenya, photographing a lion pride for a major conservation organization. As the rising sun bathed the savannah in golden light, I watched a lioness guiding her cubs across the open plain, confident, purposeful, untroubled by the opinions of those not essential to her journey. In that moment, I understood the most important lesson of my life. True success is not measured in degrees or titles or others' approval. It is found in having the courage to follow your authentic path, even when that path leads away from everything familiar and expected. My family may never fully understand or embrace my choices. They may never see my success through anything but their own limited lens. And that is okay, because I no longer need them to validate what I already know to be true. That a life lived authentically in pursuit of genuine passion is the only measure of success that truly matters. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family expectations to follow your own path? I would love to hear your stories in the comments. Do not forget to like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and share with someone who might need encouragement to follow their authentic path. Thank you for listening to my story. The silence from Riverview Heights was a fragile gift, one I suspected would break the moment my parents figured out how to reframe my Global Explorations contract into something that still fit their narrative of control. My brief, honest, and profoundly final confrontation at the dinner table and Lauren's surprising quiet support had shifted the tectonic plates beneath the Harper family foundation. I finished my Alaska assignment with a focused intensity I had not known before. Being truly free of the need for their approval was like shedding a heavy, decades-old skin. The eagles I photographed were magnificent, demanding total presence, a welcome contrast to the performative nature of my old life. Upon my return to my Atoria apartment, the momentum of my career became a tangible, powerful force. The Global Explorations cover hit the stands, instantly elevating my profile from respected niche photographer to an internationally recognized artist. My phone was alive with opportunity book agents, speaking bureaus, and gallery representatives. One Friday morning, while reviewing proposals, an email came from David Harper himself. Not an apology, of course, but a formal, sterile request for a copy of the new international assignment contract. Mother and I are reviewing your financial structuring to ensure your interests are protected. It read, "We feel it would be prudent for me to look over the legal specifics given my background with high-stakes financial transactions. Send the full documents to my office. We insist." The emotional situation was clear. The Harper family was attempting to exert control over my success by monetizing it. They couldn't diminish the achievement, so they had to annex the profit. They framed their interference as prudent parental oversight and protection, leveraging the core Harper value, a deep, self-serving belief that they knew best, particularly about money and success. I felt the familiar pressure behind my eyes, the urge to deliver a cutting retort. But the Ethan who had walked out of that dinner was different. I was no longer fighting for validation. I was defending my autonomy. My response was brief. "Thank you for the offer, Father.
However, all contracts have been fully vetted by my own legal counsel, Mr. Alan Davies in Los Angeles. If you require further information, you may contact him directly. The internal conflict was intense.
I knew this move could escalate the situation, potentially leading to a freeze-out or worse, my father's use of his vast network to subtly complicate my affairs. Yet the core value of self-sovereignty demanded this boundary. I would not allow them to manage a single dime of the success I had earned entirely alone. The next call I received was from Ryan. His tone was tight-strained, devoid of the usual fraternal warmth or contempt. "Ethan, what the hell are you doing? Dad is furious," he said. "You refused to send the contract. You know how important due diligence is. Do you honestly trust some random lawyer in LA more than our own family counsel?" "Ryan, I trust my lawyer to represent my interests, which are not necessarily the same as the Harper family's interests," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Oh, come on. That's just paranoid melodrama. Look, I'm trying to keep the peace here. Lauren and I are trying to plan the wedding. We're looking at venues in Palm Beach, and the last thing we need is Dad pulling rank and making things difficult, because you decided to play the rebellious artist again. Just send him the PDF and get it over with." The focus of the new conflict was revealed Ryan's intense subconscious anxiety over securing his own position. He needed my rebellion, my continued role as the black sheep, to validate his compliance. Now that my success was undeniable, it destabilized his carefully constructed superiority. His urgency wasn't about the contract, it was about protecting his upcoming wedding, the ultimate symbol of his correct life path, from Father's wrath. "My success, Ryan, is not a variable you get to manage for your convenience. I am an adult, and my business is mine. If this affects your wedding plans, perhaps you should discuss your priorities with Father, not me." I hung up, heart pounding. The emotional psychological element was laid bare Ryan's uncontrolled jealousy and fear of losing his golden child status. His request wasn't logical, it was purely emotional. He desperately needed the world to revert to the old hierarchy. The final piece of this new phase arrived late that afternoon. I was at the gallery making final preparations for my opening at the Riverside Collective. The air smelled of fresh paint and expensive lighting, a scent of validation unlike the antiseptic odor of St. Jude Metropolitan. As I admired the finished print of the mountain lion, the one that started it all, a figure appeared silently behind me. It was Lauren Reed Ryan's formidable fiancée. She wore surgical scrubs, not the power suit from the dinner, suggesting she had come straight from the hospital. Her exhaustion was visible, etched around her sharp eyes. "Ethan," she said quietly, her voice low. "I apologize for dropping in like this. Ryan told me you wouldn't send your father the contract. And you came here to convince me?" I asked, a fresh surge of defense rising. She shook her head, running a hand through her short dark hair. "No, I came here to tell you not to." I felt my curiosity spike. "Why?" I saw the same kind of pressure when I was coming up. "It's not about the money, Ethan. It's about the data, the leverage, the control." She stepped closer to the mountain lion photo, her focus intensely clinical. "You took a path that requires true self-reliance, which is something the Harper family fundamentally does not understand. They see your success as a deviation that must be corrected back into their orbit. By owning your data, they re-own your journey." "Why are you telling me this, Lauren? You're marrying into the center of that orbit." A flicker of raw pain crossed her face, a glimpse into the internal conflict beneath her confident exterior. "Because I respect what you did at that dinner. I've spent my life trying to earn that table's approval. You walked away from it with dignity, and I can't let them compromise that." She paused, gaze dropping to the floor. "And because Ryan is struggling. He sees your freedom, and it terrifies him. He thinks if he can just keep the family drama quiet, if he can just get this wedding done perfectly, he wins. He's completely blind to what's happening." "And what is happening, Lauren?" She looked up, meeting my eyes. "What's happening is that your father isn't doing this to protect you.
He's doing it because the terms of your National Geographic Global Explorations contract, particularly the advance for 3 continents, are now a matter of public record in the industry. It rivals or perhaps exceeds what he currently makes from his executive position. Your hobby is a threat to his status. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't about me being a disappointment. It was about me being an uncontrollable rival. The long game of control had been exposed as a defensive strategy against professional jealousy. My father, the chief of surgery, threatened by the success of his photographer's son. "He's pushing me because he's threatened," I whispered. "Yes, and he's doing it now because of the wedding. It's the perfect opportunity. Leverage Ryan's panic to get what he wants from you." Lauren took a breath, straightening her shoulders, her medical persona returning. "I have to get back to the hospital." She gave me a firm, knowing look, one that carried both warning and solidarity. I understood then that my autonomy, my success, and my carefully earned reputation were mine alone, and that no family pressure could diminish them. "Just know that I am on your side on this. Don't send the contract." She turned to leave but paused at the doorway, her hand resting lightly on the frame. The moment felt heavy, the climax twist imminent, centering on the core value of the difficult choice I now faced. "One more thing, Ethan. Ryan isn't the only one pushing for peace. Your mother has been very careful to avoid involving herself in this contract fight with your father. But she did mention something else to me this morning, something I can't quite piece together." "What?" I asked, bracing myself. "She asked me if you remembered the name of the therapist she suggested for you years ago, Dr. Sullivan. She was very insistent that I track down his professional records and contact details." When I asked why, she just said, "Because Ryan is going to need him a lot more than Ethan ever did." Lauren's words hung in the quiet gallery heavier than any large-format print. The true victim of the Harper pathology wasn't me, the outsider. It was Ryan the conformist, now buckling under the pressure of maintaining the family's rigid definition of success. I was left alone staring at the photo of the lioness. The struggle wasn't over, it had just changed players. I was free, but Ryan was now trapped. And my mother, for the first time, was signaling that she knew it. The only question was, what would I do with this knowledge? The amber eyes of the mountain lion mother in the photograph caught the perfect Utah sunrise, demanding a decision. Her predatory instinct was pure and uncomplicated. She defended her cubs because the threat was external. The Harper problem, however, was internal, a rot that consumed its own. I had earned my freedom by refusing to play the game. Now, Ryan, the player who had spent his life winning every round by the family's rules, was losing the one game that truly mattered, his sanity. My mother's cryptic message to Lauren was the ultimate act of weaponized foresight. She knew her golden son was breaking and was passing the burden of intervention to the family outlier. The conflict that gripped me was no longer about my career. It was an ethical dilemma. Did I owe Ryan anything? He had spent years participating in my humiliation, securing his own status on the pedestal I had been pushed off. Yet the look of desperate, entitled rage in his eyes during the contract call wasn't the Ryan I knew. It was a man suffocating under the David Harper legacy. The image of Lauren, a woman of formidable intellect and ambition, drawn into this domestic combat, also weighed heavily on me. Over the next 2 days, I wrestled with it. My logical side screamed, "Stay out. This is their chaos. You have earned your right to peace." But the emotional side, I admitted to myself, fueled by that brief, unexpected connection with Lauren and the memory of Ryan's childhood vulnerability before ambition calcified him, insists that my knowledge now equates to responsibility. The core value of humanity over material achievement pulsed beneath the cold logic of self-preservation. Success meant nothing if I stood by while my own brother drowned in the pool of approval I had just drained. My exhibition was scheduled for the following evening. I needed a clear head, but the noise of my family was louder than any lion roar. I decided I needed to understand the scope of the damage before acting.
The logical starting point was Dr. Sullivan. It took 2 hours of leveraging my new network, not the Harper contacts, but the genuine functional network of conservationists and journalists to track down the therapist. Dr. Sullivan wasn't easy to find. He specialized in high-profile clients in the New York medical elite and practiced with extreme discretion. I finally reached his old associate, a retired clinical psychologist named Dr. Benson. I explained the bare bones, a family struggling with professional expectations, urgent concern for a sibling, and the fact that I was the one recommended to follow up. Dr. Benson, sensing the seriousness in my voice, confirmed the name was accurate. Dr. Sullivan retired shortly after your appointment. Ethan. Dr. Benson said, slowly deliberate over the phone. But I recall the case. The mother, Margaret Harper, was remarkably persistent. Not about you, though. She was setting up the appointment for your brother Ryan. I froze, standing amidst the crates of my finished prints. She suggested Ryan needed therapy years ago when she sent you. Yes, she was quite specific. He was showing signs of severe performance anxiety and an unhealthy, almost clinical dependence on validation. She feared he couldn't handle the pressure David was putting on him, but she couldn't risk David finding out. Sending you was the shield, the acceptable failure. She got the referral for Ryan while ostensibly solving the Ethan problem. The truth hit like a psychological gut punch. My mother, Margaret, wasn't a callous, oblivious matriarch. She was a chess player, constantly calculating, capable of cruel detachment and profound, silent protectiveness. She didn't send me to Dr. Sullivan because she thought I was crazy. She sent me to normalize therapy in the family ecosystem so Ryan could use the contact later. Did Ryan ever see him? I asked, my voice strained. No, he refused. Said it would ruin his residency applications if anyone found out the perfect Ryan Harper needed help. The irony hit me hard. In that family, I was the functional one. I chose reality over illusion. Ryan chose compliance over health. I thanked Dr. Benson and hung up. The truth changed everything. My mother had protected Ryan by sacrificing my emotional standing, and Ryan, out of fear, had rejected the lifeline. The contempt I had carried for him evaporated, replaced by a bleak empathy I never expected to feel. He wasn't just a golden child. He was a terrified performer. My focus shifted from how to help Ryan to how to shield him from David. The exhibition opening was set for 7 p.m. At 6:45 p.m., I walked to the loading dock of the Riverside Collective and saw a familiar, imposing black sedan idling at the curb. Ryan was leaning against it, not in scrubs or a suit, but in slightly rumpled casual wear, a subtle sign of a man whose facade was slipping. "The place looks nice," he muttered, avoiding eye contact with the gallery entrance. "Ryan," I said, my voice gentle. "Let's cut the small talk. Did you send Father the contract?" He finally looked at me, his eyes bloodshot, exhausted. "No," I told him. "It's tied up in legal escrow until the opening. It buys me a night. He's coming at 7:30 with Mother. He wants to celebrate, which you know means securing his leverage." He ran a hand over his face. "Ethan, I need you to do something for me. I need you to give him a version of the contract, not the real one. Something with inflated numbers, but without the legal clauses that give him control. Just until the wedding. I can't have him distracted right now." His desperation was a palpable odor. "You want me to lie to Father to protect your wedding venue in Palm Beach?" I asked. "No," he snapped, the old anger surfacing, quickly replaced by pleading. "I want you to lie to save me from the endless, suffocating lecture about prudent financial management that's actually about him being jealous of your advance. Can you imagine that him being jealous of you, it's making him erratic? Please, just one more time." I looked past him toward the gallery where the first guests were arriving. This was it, the difficult choice. The path of least resistance was to forge the document, ease the pressure on Ryan, and let him continue the delusion. The path of courage was to force the issue, risking Ryan's breakdown, but potentially breaking the cycle. No, Ryan, I said softly. I won't lie for you. I won't create a fake reality to keep you safe from the truth. That's the mistake we've all been making. His face went pale. Then you want me to fail. You want me to crack so you can look better. You miserable, self-righteous artist. I want you to be free, I cut in. You can't be a surgeon if you can't handle confrontation, and you can't be a man if you hide behind the family name. The only way out is through Ryan. You have to hear no. The gallery door opened and David Harper walked in 10 minutes early, followed by a perfectly composed Margaret. They were a vision of coastal heights success moving through the art crowd like admirals surveying an unfamiliar sea. David immediately spotted us and headed straight toward the loading dock. Ryan, thank God. I need a word with your brother. David barked, not even glancing at me. Have you gotten the documents yet? Ryan froze, looking from David's commanding figure to my unyielding face. His compliance mechanism, years in the making, warred violently with his fear. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. No, father, I said, stepping forward. He hasn't because the contract isn't Ryan's to ask for and it's not yours to vet. David Harper stopped dead, his imposing presence momentarily halted by my direct public challenge. He turned his full attention to me, his surgeon's focus, cold and lethal. I beg your pardon, Ethan. This is a family matter concerning substantial capital. Your brother knows his responsibilities. His responsibility is to be a successful surgeon, not your financial gatekeeper, I countered, adrenaline sharpening every nerve. And as for the substantial capital, you won't be seeing the contract, father, because you're interested in control, not counsel, and I will not allow you to manage the success I earned while you were busy trying to humiliate me. The crowd noise of the gallery seemed to fade. Margaret and Ryan stood motionless, two statues in the shadow of the confrontation. David's face turned the deep, dangerous red I remembered from my college days. You arrogant child, he hissed, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl reserved for the operating room. You have no idea what you're jeopardizing. This is the last time I will ask. Send me the documents or consider the family relationship severed. It was the ultimate threat, the core weapon of the Harper pathology exclusion. I took a deep breath, looking past David to the mountain lion photo, the animal's eyes meeting mine in defiant clarity. The core value of unyielding courage rose within me. Consider it severed father. The word echoed in the sudden, shocked silence. David Harper stood there, utterly defeated by the rejection of his power. He did not yell. He did not argue. He simply turned his back, ramrod straight, and walked out of the gallery without a word to Margaret or Ryan. But the real climax was the aftermath. As David disappeared, Ryan didn't move. He stood shaking the protective shell he had worn for 30 years, shattered. He looked at me, then at Margaret, who was watching him with a look of terrifying, cold sadness. I can't breathe, Ryan whispered, sinking slowly to his knees against the cold concrete of the loading dock. The perfect sun finally broke. Marilyn Harper rushed past me, not toward her son, but toward the corner of the dock, where she pulled a small silver flip phone from her designer purse. Her face was set in a mask of calculated decision, her legal mind processing a crisis point. She quickly dialed. Dr. Benton, I know you're retired. This is Marilyn Harper. No, not Ethan. It's Ethan. He's ready for Dr. Klein now. I watched horrified as my mother, the corporate attorney, the master of control, made a frantic, desperate move to save the one player she genuinely valued, sacrificing everything else in the process. I was free, but the cost of that freedom was the complete destruction of my brother's life and the terrifying realization that Marilyn Harper had a separate therapist, Dr. Benton, for high-stakes emergencies, and Dr. Klein was merely the public acceptable reference. The system was deeper, more intricate, and more terrifying than I had ever imagined.